Everybody. I know we've been there. You're 18, you're sitting in some dorm room with a girl who you're absolutely infatuated with, and another guy who feels the same way. Now you're there in that triangle. You're sitting on the floor. And keep in mind that anything this girl asks you to do, you're just going to do it. And so when she pokes fun at you, tells you that really it's you and the other guy that should be together, you actually look at him for a second and you consider it. This guy that you want nothing more for him to not be there. But then you look over at him and you see him, and a part of you is happy that he's there. Because having a rival means that there's someone else that you're as good as. Having that rival means that if the girl wasn't in there, there wouldn't be only one loser sitting on that floor. There would be two. Challengers is directed by Luca Guadagnino and stars Zendaya, Josh O'Connor, and Alex Feist. Now, I use the word losers for a reason, and that's because each of these guys are losers in their own way. Let's start with Art Donaldson, who's played by Mike Feist, and he's a successful pro tennis player, but he's never gotten over that hump. He's never been able to win an Open. And it seems in all aspects of his life, he is unable to be the one at the top. He's unable to be the center of attention. He always needs someone else that he can look up at, someone else that he can admire, someone else that can make the big decisions for him. And for the last 13 or so years, that person has been his wife, Tashi Duncan, played by Zendaya. And before that, when he was a child, a teenager, it was his best friend. That being Patrick Zweig, who's played by Josh O'Connor. Now this guy is a loser for a completely opposite reason. He feels like everyone constantly owes him something. He feels like the world owes him something that he hasn't yet received. And this led him to a very unfulfilling tennis career in which he never even got close to the level of his buddy Art. And in fact, was stuck in a cycle of occasionally qualifying, occasionally making qualifiers, and sometimes not. And with each step along the way, he had an excuse, he had a reason, he had something to complain about. Now, each of these characters have their central flaw, and that flaw explains why they're unable to live with themselves. They're unable to live by themselves. For Art, because he needs someone to look up at, and for Patrick, because he needs someone to give him the respect, someone to look up at him, someone to give him the volley so that he can slam it down. And guys, by the end of this film, when we have the final tennis showdown between these two characters, which I will not spoil yet, I will tell you before I get into spoilers. But when we have this final showdown, both of their central faults will be on full display and will ultimately be exchanged. Now, from the jump, Challengers is going to be compared against whatever your favorite love triangle film is. But it's something different. Challengers is the movie Whiplash if Miles Teller had two girlfriends. Okay? Now, by that I mean both movies are about a pursuit of greatness in their field of choice, and a pursuit that sacrifices personal relationships and any other system of value in the pursuers' lives. Now, this brings me finally to Zendaya in this film, playing the character of Tashi Duncan, seemingly the only one who is fully committed to the craft of tennis and to being a truly world-class, successful athlete in a way that trumps anything else in her life. She's a femme fatale for these two challengers in that she controls them the entire time. She pulls the strings and never seems at the whim of anyone else. In fact, she never seems human throughout the film, whereas Art and Patrick are these very clearly written human characters. Tashi is more of a cinematic icon, a cinematic entity that we are familiar with, a symbol of a powerful, beautiful, seductive, but conniving figure who is really just out for herself. And in fact, it is this inhuman base onto which Art and Josh project their ultimate desires. Think Vertigo here, as they, from the time that they're 18, obsess over her beauty, over her standing, over what she means to the world of tennis, to the pursuit of success. In fact, the way that the boys are introduced to Tashi feels straight out of a teen comedy as they observe her from a distance, longingly, drooling over her and talking to each other about it in a way that is certainly funny, but, and keep this next point in mind, a way that's not even played for comedy. And that defines this film. Challengers, it's not played for comedy, it's not played for romance, it doesn't play with your emotions, even as the film's stylistic flourishes, which I will discuss, are in your face. The emotional undercurrent remains up for you to interpret and to decide, beginning with that givenly pretty hilarious introduction scene in which they meet her, they talk to her, and discuss their pasts. We still don't know exactly how dramatic the moment is supposed to be, how competitive the moment is. Nonetheless, it illuminates Tashi's comfort in controlling others and her seeming disconnection from the needs that the boys have and from a true longing for a relationship beyond merely a fun charade. So now let's talk about those stylistic flourishes that Guadagnino employs. Now, The use of music in this film is going to immediately stick out to everyone. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, one of our greatest current composing teams for film, provide a score that is very unique by contemporary film soundtrack standards. It's mostly techno. It's mostly upbeat and yet monotonous. And they play these themes consistently throughout the film, often set to slow motion walking, looking, and tennis playing. And the effect of this music in combination with the way that these scenes are acted, the way that these scenes are played, wherein we can't tell exactly what's comedic and what's deeply dramatic, the effect that this all has is one of neutrality. As in your face as the slow motion may seem, as the music may seem, and as the movement of the camera may seem, the camera goes everywhere in this movie. We see camera in audience, camera on the tennis players, camera on the rackets, camera on ball spinning around, and somehow they don't make it dizzy. Camera on the court, and in maybe the greatest shot of the film, camera in the court, looking up as Art bounces a ball, and it is reduced to a moment of abstraction with the line of the tennis court cutting across the screen, and it becomes merely a physical moment. Now, one effect of all of these camera moves, all of these point of view shots, is it generates a sense of physicality, a sense of three-dimensionality, and a feeling of touch as the ball contacts the racket, contacts the court. And this feeling of physicality is, more than anything, the trademark that has become associated with director Luca Guadagnino. And there's a couple memorable shots that I want to point out. One in which Art hits the side of his racket against his calf, and it just shakes ever so slightly, and there's a close-up shot, almost a medium close-up of that calf and tennis racket. And it's the type of shot that is so rarely incorporated in a movie, but that we're familiar with in our own life. We can imagine that feeling. And so that sense of physicality is new. It is joyful. I think it's important to look at this movie as a work of realism. Now, as stylistic as it might seem, as I said, slow motion, music, whipping camera moves. This is a work of realism. It includes little shots, little moments that would not often be included. The film takes place over 13 years and jumps around chronologically many different times throughout its run. Now, the interesting thing about this film and the passage of time is that most movies that use a cross-cutting technique like that and a narrative structure like that, they do it in part communicating how the characters change over time. And often the characters in the later period will be noticeably different from the ones that they were at the start. They'll be different people. But in Challengers, they're all pretty much stay the same. These characters are unable to overcome their defining flaws, their defining struggles over this period, and they end up just looking like the same people, except for perhaps the later part of the film. So now let's talk about that ending, and this will include spoilers. There are 3 key moments to that ending scene. Firstly, Patrick and Art being able to speak in a code that no one else understands through Patrick placing a tennis ball in the center of the racket before he serves, in a hilarious moment but a moment that is cheesy in a good way. And so the next thing that is called back to is Tashi's idea from the start of the film that tennis is a relationship when played correctly. Because both parties understand exactly what the other is doing and what they're trying to do. And then, of course, this is what we see in that final rally in which they're just locked in that duel and it's just going back, the ball's going back and forth, ending with the moment in which they, in theory, overcome their flaws. And Patrick ends up being the one who serves up, who volleys up the ball, who gives, perhaps unwittingly, the opportunity to Art to actually jump up high and slam the ball down. For Art to be the one that everyone is looking up at, in a reversal of their entire character arcs up till that point, and then finally to Tashi's scream, where for once the three of them all see each other and understand each other, because the two players, when they're really playing the game right, know exactly what the other is doing. They know why they're doing it, and they're communicating in a way that is not inhibited by anything else. This, of course, is a mode of living that is impossible for all these three characters in their wider lives. Now, I spoke about the emotional neutrality of Challengers as its defining quality in contrast to its stylistic flair. And that emotional neutrality remains the strong point of things really coming to a head in the third act, in Tashi's final emotional encounter with each man independently. And these are the two greatest scenes of the film, her last encounter with each guy. Her final one with Art is when she finally admits that if he loses the match against Patrick, she will leave him. And he just collapses down onto the bed in worship of her, in love for her, and he just goes, "Can you hold me until I fall asleep?" And she's like, "Yeah." And then she does it. It's a scene that's an oxymoron. It's like, why is she feeling such an emotional attachment to him in this moment? Why are they experiencing such a connection in this moment that is based around the end of their connection or the lack of their connection? And again, that's a spot where what we're meant to feel is not in the realm of the explicitly logical. Rather, it's these contrasting feelings, that confusing experience that makes it memorable. Now, her final scene with Patrick comes in that parking lot when she starts leaving, walking away from him. He says the hotel is back the other way, so she comes back past him again, spits in his face. We go to slow-mo. It's kind of like a shaky, windy shot of close-up of them both facing each other. It's a really intense, measured moment, but we don't know what we're feeling here. Are we feeling a fight? Are we feeling love? And then they start making out, and we're still not sure. And it's the same thing as her last scene with Art. It's these contrasting emotional expectations that the actual surface of the film allows for both. And that is the greatest strength of Challengers. And it's also why I'm excited to hear other people's takes on it. So if you did make it to this point in the video, thank you for watching. Be sure to drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on the film and on what I've said here. But anyways, I will see you guys in the next one.